She had walked the last 4 miles, and she had done it deliberately, and by the time Selina Marchetti was announced at the doors of Hartleigh, the hem of her travelling dress carried 9 miles of Northumberland Road on it, and there was a tear at the elbow she had not troubled to mend. The Duke of Hartleigh laughed. It was not a cruel laugh, which she noted, and which made it considerably worse. It was the easy, unthinking laugh of a man who has never in his life had to consider what a laugh costs, delivered across 20 feet of drawing room to 11 guests who had every one of them turned to look at the door. "Forgive me," Frederick Anstruther said, coming forward with his glass still in his hand. "I was expecting the celebrated Signora Marchetti, and I find I have been sent a woman who has walked here. Did the coach break down, madam, or have you come to teach us all a lesson in humility before the soup?" "Neither, Your Grace." Selina handed her bonnet to a footman who did not know what to do with it. The coach turned back at Rothbury, because the driver had been told the road was bad. The road was not bad. I have seen bad roads. She looked at him for the first time, directly, and did not smile. I have also been told a great many times what I ought to have expected, by men who were not on the road. Somebody near the fireplace made a small sound. "You walked from Rothbury," Frederick said. "I walked from Rothbury." "That is 9 miles. "It is 9 1/4, said Selina Marchetti, "and I would have walked it in half boots rather than lose the engagement, Your Grace. But as it happens, I own only the 1 pair, and they are on my feet. Shall I sing before dinner or after? I am told your guests have come some distance, and I would not wish to keep them from the table over a hem." The 11 guests were now looking at the Duke of Hartleigh rather than at her, and the Duke of Hartleigh, who had been laughing 40 seconds earlier, discovered that his glass had become an extremely awkward object to be holding. "After," he said. "Please. And Signora, my housekeeper will find you, your housekeeper will find me a chair, Your Grace, and a glass of water, and I shall be entirely restored." She was already crossing the room. "I did not come to be dressed. I came to sing." She had not always been Marchetti. She had been Selina March of Whitby until she was 19, when a voice teacher passing through had heard her singing over a fish barrel and told her father, who was a chandler, that his daughter had an instrument worth £1,100 and no chance whatever of using it under an English name. So she had become Marchetti, and gone to Naples on money her father had borrowed against his own stock, and come back 6 years later with 2 seasons at the San Carlo behind her, and a reputation that had crossed the Alps ahead of her. What had not crossed the Alps was money. Selina had come home in December to a chandlery that had failed in her absence, and a father who had died in the failing, and she had spent 4 months discovering the specific arithmetic of a celebrated singer with no capital. That the engagements were real, and the fees were real, and the fees were paid a quarter in arrears, and that a woman with nothing between her and the quarter day could not afford a coach, or a dressmaker, or an hour of pretending she could. The 11 guests at Hartleigh had come to hear her because she was famous. They did not know she had walked from Rothbury because she had spent her last 4 shillings on the seat that turned back. She did not tell them. She had decided somewhere around the 6th mile that she was finished explaining herself to rooms. The 6th mile was where the rain had started, and where she had stopped composing the polite version, the one in which she arrived apologizing, and was pitied, and was lent a dress by somebody's maid, and sang beautifully, and was thanked warmly, and was paid a quarter in arrears. She had performed that version 11 times since April in 11 houses. It worked. Everybody was very kind, and every one of those houses had written to her afterward, offering slightly less than the last. Because a woman who arrives apologizing has told the room what she thinks she is worth before she has opened her mouth. By the 7th mile she had stopped composing anything at all, and had simply walked, and had arrived at the gates of Hartleigh in a state of considerable clarity. The Duke of Hartleigh was 34, and had been a duke for 11 years, which was long enough for the laugh to have become automatic. He had not been a cruel boy. He had been a second son until he was 23, and second sons are permitted to be interesting. And Frederick Anstruther had been interesting, had read law he never used, and had once, memorably, told his own father at dinner that the tenantry at Hartleigh were housed worse than the horses, which was true, and which had cost him a fortnight of silence. Then his brother had drowned at Whitby, and Frederick had been a duke, and the thing that had happened to him afterward was not cruelty. It was easiness. 11 years of rooms arranging themselves around him. 11 years of every joke landing, because a duke's jokes land. 11 years in which nobody had once told him that a thing he said was not funny. And a man who is never told that eventually stops being able to hear it himself. He had laughed in his own doorway because a laugh was what came out of him in a doorway. That was the whole of it. And it was not a defense. And by the fish course he had begun to understand that it was very much worse than if it had been. She was seated below the salt, between a deaf cannon and an empty chair, which was where the household had put her when the housekeeper had seen the dress. It lasted through the soup. Lady Ormondy, on the Duke's right, had been talking loudly for some minutes about the Italian opera, and had reached the confident conclusion that the whole art of it was really a very simple business of shouting prettily in a foreign tongue, and had turned, with the particular graciousness of a woman handing an inferior the chance to agree with her, down the table. "You will correct me if I am wrong, Signora. You are wrong," said Selina. The table stopped. "I beg your pardon? You asked me to correct you if you were wrong. You are wrong, and I have found in 6 years that people who ask for correction generally want it very much less than they say. So I shall be brief." She set down her spoon. "You have said the language does not signify. Madam, I have sung the same aria in Naples and in Vienna, and in Naples they wept, and in Vienna they applauded, and the difference was not the singing. It was that in Naples they knew what I was saying. The words are not decoration. The words are the whole of it. The music is only the thing that makes the words unbearable." There was a silence of the kind that happens when 11 people simultaneously decide not to be the first to speak. "That," said the deaf canon, at considerable volume, "is the best thing I have heard said at this table in 9 years. Somebody at the far end laughed, a real laugh, not the Duke's earlier one. And the table came back to life, and Selina picked her spoon up again, and Frederick Anstruther, 20 feet away at the head of his own table, found that he had not eaten anything for some minutes. She did it 4 more times before the dessert, and she did not do it once with a raised voice. She did it to a young man who told her that a woman on a stage was necessarily a woman without reputation, by asking him, mildly, whether he had ever considered how much reputation costs to maintain, and who is generally paying for it. She did it to Lady Ormondy's husband, who asked what she was paid, by telling him the figure, exactly, in guineas, without flinching, and then asking his own, and watching him discover that a question is not the same object when it comes back. She did it to the Duke's own cousin, who observed that it must be a great thing to be admired by so many, by saying, "It is a great thing to be paid by so many. The admiration is quite free, sir, and one cannot eat it." And she did it, finally, to Frederick himself. He had been quiet for most of the meal, which his guests found notable. At the dessert he leaned forward and said, "Into a lull, Signora. I made a poor joke at your expense in my own doorway, and you have spent 2 hours making me pay for it in installments, and I find I would rather settle the account." What would you have of me? Nothing, Your Grace. That is not an answer. It is the only true one. Selina turned her glass by the stem. You want me to name a price so the thing can be finished, and you may stop feeling it. I have been in a great many rooms with a great many men who wanted the feeling finished, and I will tell you honestly that I have stopped helping them. She looked up. You laughed at a woman who had walked 9 miles to keep her word to you. You may sit in that for the rest of the evening. It costs you nothing, and it is the only thing I want. Frederick Anstruther sat back in his chair. That, he said slowly, is the first bill anyone has presented me in 11 years that I cannot pay. Yes, said Selina. That is generally how one knows it is a real one. She sang after dinner, and afterward nobody in that room ever entirely agreed about what happened. They agreed on the facts. She sang 3 things: a Handel, a Neapolitan song nobody knew, and, last, unaccompanied, because the pianoforte at Hartleigh was a quarter-tone flat, and she had said so publicly and pleasantly at the keyboard an English song about a woman waiting on a quay. What they did not agree on was the room. Lady Ormondy claimed afterward to have wept, which was true. The deaf canon, who could not hear a word of it, said the sound came up through the floor into his boots, and that he had understood it perfectly, which was also true. 2 of the guests wrote to friends about it within the week. The young man who had spoken of reputation did not say anything at all for some hours, and Frederick Anstruther stood at the back of his own drawing-room, out of the candlelight, and listened to a woman in a torn dress sing an English song about waiting, and understood with a clarity that arrived all at once, and would not leave him for a year, that he had laughed at her in a doorway, because she had frightened him, because she had come into his house owning nothing at all, and had been, from the first 4 seconds, the only person in it who did not require anything from him. The song was about a woman on a quay at Whitby, which he did not know, and which he would not learn for 8 months. His brother had drowned at Whitby. He did not make the connection that night. There was no connection to make. She had chosen the song because it was the only unaccompanied thing she trusted in a damp room. But he stood at the back wall with his hands behind him and found that his eyes were stinging, in his own house, in front of 11 guests, over a song about weather and a harbour. And he had the sense not to move until it was finished. When the room applauded, he did not. He waited until they had done, and then said into the pause, "Signora, the last one. What is it called?" "It has no name, Your Grace. It is what women in Whitby sing when the boats are late." She was gathering her music. There are a great many verses. I sang 4. The rest are worse. They talked for 11 minutes afterward, by the fire, which the room noticed. You said the pianoforte was flat. It is a quarter-tone flat, and it has been for some years, and it is not the tuner's fault. Selina had accepted a chair at last, and had stopped, at some point in the evening, being a woman visibly holding a position. It is the north wall. There is damp in it. You can hear it in the instrument before you can see it in the plaster, which is generally the way. A house tells you in one language before it tells you in another. Nobody has mentioned it. No, she agreed. They wouldn't. Frederick looked at her. That is the 2nd time this evening you have told me something my whole household knows and has not said. It is the 3rd, Your Grace, but you were not counting the soup. She said it without any particular edge. May I tell you the thing I have learnt in 11 houses since April? Nobody lies to a duke. It isn't necessary. One simply does not raise the subject. And a man may live his entire life in a house with a wet wall and never once be told a lie about it. And you raise it. I am paid to be in the room for 1 evening and never come back, said Selina. It is the freest position in England. I have no idea why more people do not want it. he wrote to her the next morning. Not an apology, he had learnt that much at his own dinner table. He wrote to ask about the pianoforte. It was the correct letter, though he did not entirely know why, and Selina answered it from Newcastle in a hand like copperplate that the instrument was flat because the room was damp. That a room is damp because a house is loved unevenly, and that he might have it tuned or he might have the walls seen to, and that only one of those was an answer. He had the walls seen to. She wrote again, he wrote again. It became, over the summer, a correspondence of an entirely improper regularity, conducted almost wholly about subjects neither of them cared about, which is how such things generally go. The wall, the tuner, the state of the Newcastle theatre, the specific villainy of a manager in Leeds who had held her fee 3 weeks past quarter day, and then offered to advance it privately, in his own rooms, at an interest she declined to name. That letter Frederick read 4 times. He wrote back and did not offer her money, which took him 2 attempts, and which she noticed. What he wrote instead was that he had 11 tenants at Hartleigh whose leases fell in at Michaelmas, and that he had spent a fortnight discovering he did not know what any of them were paid for their wool, because he had never asked, because nobody had raised the subject. He asked her how one begins asking a question one has avoided for 11 years, without sounding as though one is conducting an inspection. Selina wrote back 4 pages. It was, she thought afterward, the moment the thing turned. Not the dinner, not the song. A man who has been laughed at himself and writes to ask how to stop being lied to by his own house has become, whatever else, somebody worth answering. She answered him from Leeds, and from Hull, and from a coaching inn near Doncaster where the fire smoked, and by August the correspondence had reached the state where he told her he had raised the wool price and lost £11 a year by it, and she told him that £11 was a great deal cheaper than 11 years, and that she hoped he had had the wall seen to as well. He sent her the plasterer's bill, which was, in its way, the most romantic object she had ever received. She saw him 3 times that summer, all of them in public, all of them entirely correct. Once at York, where he came to a concert and did not come round afterward, which she noticed and approved of. Once at Harrogate, where they walked the length of the pump room in front of 200 people talking about drainage. And once, in September, at Newcastle, where he arrived at a rehearsal unannounced and was made to sit at the back for 2 hours while she took a chorus of 11 shopkeepers' daughters through a purcell they were not equal to. They are dreadful, he said afterward, honestly, they are dreadful, and they will be less dreadful in November. And one of them, the small one, at the end, has something. Selina was packing her music. Her father makes rope. She will sing at a wedding or 2, and then she will make rope. That is the whole of it, and I have decided I do not care, because 2 hours a week for 11 weeks is not nothing, and nobody ever asked me to justify what I did with my Thursdays before I was famous. Frederick watched her tie the folder. How much are you paid for this? Nothing, it costs me the room. She looked up. Do not offer. I was not going to offer. You were composing an offer. I was composing an offer, Frederick admitted, and I have now put it away, and I would like some credit for the putting away, because it was a very good offer, and it took me the whole of the purcell. The trouble was his aunt, and it arrived in September, and it was not stupid. Lady Ormondy had spent the summer in London being extremely gracious about the Duke of Hartlegh's singer. She had spread the story herself, the rags, the walk, the 9 miles, and she had spread it with such warmth and such evident admiration that by August it had become established in 4 drawing rooms that the whole thing had been arranged. That a clever adventuress with a failing name had walked 9 miles into a duke's doorway, in a torn dress, on purpose. calculating exactly the effect it would have, and that the poor man had been managed like a fish since April. It was, Selina thought when it finally reached her in October, very nearly the cleverest thing anyone had ever done to her. Because she could not deny it without sounding as though she were denying it, and because the only proof against it was her own poverty. And because she would sooner have gone back to the fish barrels than stand in a London drawing room and prove she was poor. And because this was the part that kept her awake, it was not entirely false. She had known what the dress would do. She had known it on the 6th mile. She had walked into that doorway angry, and she had used the anger, and she had used it well, and there was no version of the truth she could say aloud that did not have that in it somewhere. Frederick heard it in November and did the worst possible thing, which was to believe it for 11 days. Not the whole of it. He was not a fool. But he had been raised by a man who had told him, with great regularity, that everyone who came near a dukedom came for the dukedom, and the 11 days were the 11 days it took that voice to be louder than the letters. And in the 11th day he wrote to her, and it was a careful letter, and she read the care in it in about 4 seconds. She did not answer. He came to Newcastle on the 14th day and found her in a rehearsal room over a chandler's, which he did not understand the significance of until much later. You believed it? For 11 days. Yes, thank you, said Selina, for saying 11 and not none, and sat down on the pianoforte bench with her back to him, which he had learnt by then meant she was deciding something. It is not true, he said. Half of it is true, and that is what your aunt understood, and you did not. She turned round. I knew what the dress would do, Frederick. I knew on the road. I was angry. At the driver, at the road, at 4 months of quarter days, at my father for dying in a shop I had bankrupted him to leave. And I walked into your house wanting somebody to look at me and be sorry, and your laugh was the best thing that could have happened to me because it made the whole room mine in 90 seconds. I used it. I am not sorry. That is the truth, and it is not the same shape as the lie, and I will not have you comfort me by pretending it is. Frederick stood in a rehearsal room over a chandler's shop and understood that he had come to offer a woman his belief and was being handed something considerably more valuable and much harder to hold. Then what is the difference, he said, between the truth and her lie? Say it and I will say it in London. The difference, said Selina, is that she says I walked 9 miles to catch a duke. I walked 9 miles because I had given my word to sing, and I would have walked it into an empty house. Then let me say it. In London. I have a voice in 11 rooms she cannot enter, and I would spend the whole of it no. Selina, no. And I want you to hear why. Because it is not pride. She came off the bench. If the Duke of Hartleigh stands up in Grosvenor Square and says his singer is no adventuress, what has the room heard? It has heard a besotted man defending his own choice. Every soul in it will nod and go home certain of exactly what they were certain of before, and considerably sorrier for you. She let that sit. There is one person in England whose word settles this, and it is the woman who walked the 9 miles, and she must say it in a room where nobody can claim she was coached. That is not you being useless, Frederick. That is you being the only man in London who understands why he must sit down. Frederick Anstruther sat down. You are aware, he said, that you have now twice instructed me to sit in something. Yes, you are improving at it. It is the single most useful thing you have learned all year. She said it herself, in the end, which was the only way it was ever going to work. Lady Ormonde held a musical evening in Grosvenor Square in December and invited Selina Marchetti to it, which was a stroke of some genius. Nobody could then say she had been cut, and everybody would be in the room to see how she behaved. Selina came in a plain grey silk correctly and unremarkably dressed, which cost her the whole of the Newcastle fee and was worth every guinea, because it took the first weapon out of the room. She sang. Then, before the applause was finished, she spoke. "Which one does not do?" "You have all heard a story about me," she said, into a room of 90 people, pleasantly, at a volume that carried without effort, because carrying without effort was her entire profession. "It is a good story, and I should like to correct it in one particular only, because the rest of it does me no harm at all. I walked 9 miles into the Duke of Hartsmere's doorway in April in a torn dress. That is true. I was angry when I did it, and I knew what it looked like. That is also true, and I have heard it said that this makes me a schemer, and I find I cannot argue with a woman's right to know what she looks like. Here is the correction. I did not walk to be seen by a duke. I walked because I had been paid a quarter in arrears, as we all are, and I had 4 shillings, and I had given my word to sing in that house on that evening. She let it sit for exactly the right length of time. I would have walked it to sing to an empty room. I have done, twice, once at Ancona, to 11 people and a dog, in weather considerably worse. Nobody wrote about that one. Somebody laughed. It went round the room the way it does. So you may keep the story, Selina said. It is not an insult to say that a woman of no fortune knows the value of what she does. It is only an insult if you believe such a woman should not be allowed to know it. She inclined her head. Madam, thank you for the invitation. Your pianoforte is beautifully in tune. Lady Ormondy, who had spent 5 months building a very careful house, sat in it while it came down. Frederick found her afterward on the stairs. You did not need me at all. No, Selina agreed. That is rather the point I have been making since April, and I am glad it has finally landed. She was shaking slightly, which only he was near enough to see. Ask me the thing you came up the stairs to ask, Frederick, before my hands give out and I have to sit down in front of these people. He asked her. I want 2 things said out loud first, she said, and I want them said here, on the stairs, where it is inconvenient. The first is that I will go on singing, not as an indulgence, and not until it becomes awkward. I will go on singing until my voice goes, and then I will teach, and I will take fees for it, and I will not be a duchess who used to sing. Agreed. And the second? The second is that you laughed at me in your own doorway in front of 11 people, said Selina Marchetti, and I want you to say, now, that you have never once apologized for it. Frederick Anstruther looked at her. I have never once apologized for it, he said. You would not take it. You told me at my own table that the only thing you wanted was for me to sit in it, and I have sat in it for 8 months, and I intend to go on sitting in it, and if you marry me, I will hear that laugh in my head every time I am tempted to think I know what a room contains. He took her hand. That is not an apology. It is a considerably longer sentence. Yes, said Selina. Now ask me again, because I was not attending. The following autumn there was a chandlery in Whitby with a new roof and a name over the door that was not Marchetti. It sold candles, which it had always done, and it also housed 4 rooms above the shop where 6 girls from the harbour came 3 afternoons a week to be taught scales by a woman who had once sung at the San Carlo and who charged the parish 6pence a head for it, and who had refused, flatly and repeatedly, to let her husband pay the 6pence. Ormondy has gone to Bath, Frederick said, coming up the stairs with the letters. Permanently, one gathers. She has told Bath that she discovered you, which I find so nearly true that I have decided not to write and correct her. Let her have it. Selina did not look up from the girl at the keyboard. Again, Hannah, and the words this time, you are not decorating them. They are the whole of it. The music is only the thing that makes them unbearable. She tapped the page twice. Good, that. Frederick sat down on the stairs, which no duke had done in the history of Whitby, and listened to a fisherman's daughter murder a Handel aria in a room over a candle shop. "You know they still tell it wrong," he said. "The 9 miles. It has become 11 in London, and in Bath I am told you arrived barefoot. They will tell it however they like." Selina turned a page for the girl. "I have stopped minding. They can have the rags and the walk and the laugh, and they may make it 11 miles or 20, and every version of it ends the same way regardless, with a room full of people who came to look at a torn dress and stayed to hear a woman sing.